In the beginning of story, the bunch of armored convoys crawled across a barren wasteland, engines growling as they pushed through the thick curtain of fog. Inside, a handful of sharply dressed civilians sat in tense silence. The quiet was broken only by a guard's stern voice as he laid out strict rules for their arrival. They were ordered to stay alert and avoid provoking any inmates. Trying to lighten the atmosphere, a bright-spirited young woman named Lala introduced herself to Dante Kang, a man whose expression barely shifted. To their surprise, both happened to be science teachers. Soon the others chimed in, including a philosophy instructor whose subject was compulsory. Bit by bit, the tension eased as the teachers exchanged introductions. Only one man remained tight-lipped, his expression clouded with unease. He seemed to be the only one truly questioning how they all ended up in this situation. Their destination soon became clear. Fogland, the largest prison on the planet, feared by the entire world. Lala attempted to laugh away her nerves, insisting nothing too awful could happen in a place like this. The grim-faced teacher countered by asking if any of them knew how the prison originated. He explained that a massive meteorite had crashed here 50 years earlier. 5 years after the impact, world leaders joined forces to construct a colossal prison directly over the crater. The others perked up, recalling online rumors about aliens, mutated life forms, and supernatural incidents. The grim teacher added that one scholar even claimed Fogland had opened the gates of hell itself, joking that their future students might actually be monsters. Even the emotionless Dante allowed himself a faint smile, wondering aloud how educators could believe such wild theories, insisting that everyone deserved a chance to learn, no matter their past. His colleague reminded him these were the most dangerous criminals alive. To Dante, they were simply people who never received proper education. The others exchanged weary glances, silently calling him hopelessly idealistic. A guard's voice announced that they were 5 minutes away from Fogland. Lala's cheerful energy vanished instantly as fear settled in. The first gate creaked open, and dread washed over the group. Even Dante's stoic mask began to crack. They stepped into Fogland, an infamous super prison stretching across an endless sea of fog. Dante steadied himself, repeating the reason he came, to teach the inmates. A disturbingly cheerful sign welcomed them as strict orders followed. No photos, no personal belongings. Everything would be confiscated. The fog thickened until they could barely see a few steps ahead. The facility dissolved into white haze, and the name Fogland finally made sense. As they moved toward Gate 2, a heavily armed guard explained the next procedures, insisting it was all for their protection. The teachers tried to convince themselves these warnings were exaggerated. Deep down, none believed it. Escorted by guards, they marched deeper into the prison. After crossing another threshold, Dante whispered to himself that there was nothing to fear. People lived here after all. Their assigned classroom looked nothing like what they imagined. It was a stark white chamber viewed from behind a thick pane of reinforced glass. Dante sat down, completely confused by the setup, wondering how anyone could teach under such extreme conditions. A guard appeared at a heavy metal door and gave a chilling announcement. The inmates would be entering shortly. The teachers were ordered not to stand up under any circumstances. Dante swallowed, the reality hitting him with full force. The steel door unlocked with a deep metallic groan. It swung open slowly, revealing the empty white classroom beyond. Then the prisoners were escorted inside. They entered in chains, and the sight was like something torn from a nightmare. One inmate with glowing, misshapen eyes leaned so close to the glass it fogged beneath his breath. Another glared with a stare that felt almost inhuman. A massive, hulking figure grinned with wicked amusement when he noticed the teachers watching from behind the barrier. He wondered aloud if the people behind the glass were even human themselves. As guards forced the monsters-like inmates into their seats, Dante's thoughts spiraled. Nothing he believed prepared him for this. The grim teacher's warnings echoed loudly in his mind. He tried to brush away the terror, insisting silently that these were ordinary people. He remembered his own confident claim that they simply lacked education. Now, sitting face to face with creatures that barely seemed human, he wasn't sure if he believed it anymore. He then steadied his breathing, straightened his tie, and introduced himself to the room full of monstrous inmates. Trying to maintain professionalism, he opened with an icebreaker. He asked why science was considered the most popular subject here, even tossing in a joke about building a rocket to escape the prison. The reaction was unnerving. Silence swallowed the room until one creature erupted into a twisted manic cackle. The distorted inmate found the stiff atmosphere amusing, his laughter echoing against the walls. Refusing to be rattled, Dante shifted gears and launched into a simpler topic. He held up an unusual plant and instructed the prisoners to examine what had been placed on their desks. Each inmate had been given a glass of water with a single sweet potato inside. His grand idea: teach them how to grow a plant, something taught to young children. Dante believed these criminals had never been taught the most basic lessons. He hoped that caring for a living thing might awaken a sense of responsibility, maybe even compassion. Looking each prisoner in the eye, he acknowledged their pasts but insisted they learn something today. He compared them to the sweet potato, insisting both held untapped potential. He announced their first group project with a hopeful smile. The response was silence. then confusion, then fury. One inmate snapped, enraged at being compared to a root vegetable. Dante's calm speech fell apart as he scrambled to clarify his metaphor. The prisoner solved the dilemma by shoving the sweet potato into his mouth and eating it. Dante froze. One by one, the rest of the class followed, devouring their science projects without hesitation. Panic seized Dante as he shouted that they were meant to grow them, not eat them. Crushed, he sank down, questioning what kind of students that he had been assigned. Before he could completely give up, a voice rose from the back. A masked prisoner demanded to know how to produce fog. Dante blinked, baffled. He repeated the bizarre question, then attempted to connect it to the prison's infamous mist. But the inmate wasn't interested in meteorology. He mocked Dante openly. Still clueless, Dante assumed the question was another joke about escaping. His confusion was cut short when the masked inmate slammed his fist into the reinforced glass. Blue energy crackled around the impact, the barrier trembling under the pressure. His glowing eyes lit up with the same strange power. Dante's composure shattered. He screamed into his comms, babbling about the impossible breach. He couldn't understand how the fortified glass could crack. Before he could recover, the door to the observation room was kicked open. A voice on the comms declared a code Omega. Dozens of armed guards stormed in, weapons already raised. The squad commander glared at Dante and ordered him to get down. The next order chilled the air. Eliminate every prisoner. Without hesitation, the guards unleashed a storm of gunfire. Bullets tore through the weakened glass and shredded the classroom. Dante screamed as the lesson on life transformed into a massacre. The barrier shattered, and the world dissolved into gunfire and blood. He hurled himself against the door, trying to stop the slaughter, but the commander barked at him to stay down until the executions were complete. Dante cried out, horrified, demanding to know how they could kill so many people without hesitation. A guard moved in to finish off one inmate at point-blank range, but prisoner 0901 only grinned. He grabbed the gun's barrel with ease. In the next instant, the guard's life ended in a violent crimson flash. Dante's breath caught, his mind unraveling. Amidst the bloodied classroom, the masked prisoner remained seated calmly at his desk. Dante slumped to the ground. From behind his mask, a single glowing eye watched him. The true nature of Fogland had finally revealed itself. The scene then cuts to a dim concrete chamber, lit only by a flickering ceiling fan that groans with every rotation. Dante lay sprawled on the cold floor, his disastrous first day ending with him unconscious. But he wasn't alone. A silhouette in an orange jumpsuit crouched in the corner watching. Dante stirred, the memories of the massacre crashing back as soon as his eyes opened. His vision adjusted to the murky room, landing on the figure sitting mere feet away. He jolted upright. He wasn't just in a cell, he was sharing it with one of the very creatures he had tried to teach. It was the masked prisoner. The same glowing eyes stared straight through him. Dante's mind scrambled for clarity. Trembling, he managed to choke out a question, asking the figure who he was. The words came out mangled and shaky. The heavy steel door behind him confirmed the awful truth. He wasn't a teacher right now. He was a prisoner. Panicked, Dante demanded to know where he had been taken. The masked inmate replied with unsettling nonchalance. My house. Dante froze, confused and horrified. Prisoner 0182 stared back, unbothered by Dante's distress. As Dante tried to piece together how he ended up here, his memory replayed the final moments in the classroom. Guards firing wildly, prisoners overpowering them in seconds, the room descending into carnage. His last memory before blacking out was the sound of chaos swallowing everything. Back in the grimy cell, the masked prisoner shifted quietly, moving with an eerie calm. Dante forced out another question. Were they really in a prison? And was this creature responsible for dragging him here? The prisoner didn't care for the accusation. His attention was fixed on something he held. Dante followed his gaze. The sweet potato. Dante's expression twisted. He had no idea what was happening anymore. The masked inmate's request was painfully simple. Teach me how to grow it. Dante stared, dumbfounded. After everything, the violence, the kidnapping, the nightmare, the monster wanted a gardening lesson. Dante remembered his own naive words about ignorance and education. Now those beliefs felt like a joke. His frustration finally boiled over. He exploded, raging at the absurdity of being dragged into this nightmare over a root vegetable. He mentally apologized to the ethics teacher he once mocked. Clearly, these creatures weren't misunderstood. They were lethal, and he was next. Then he noticed something clutched in the prisoner's hand. A weapon, a blade, a gun. Pure fear took control. Acting on instinct, Dante lunged at the masked inmate. They fell to the floor, Dante pinning him down with a burst of terrified strength. He managed to hold him in place, realizing this prisoner seemed weaker than the monsters from the classroom. He told himself he could handle this one. He just had to remove whatever was in that right hand. He twisted the arm, and and something tore loose with a horrible rip. Dante froze. The prisoner's entire arm had come off. Apologized, though he couldn't resist scolding for being foolish enough to get himself kidnapped. Annoyingly, he wasn't wrong. And after all that, the creature returned to the sweet potato. He still only wanted to grow it. Dante snapped completely. He refused to teach someone so clueless and declared he was leaving. He marched to the cell door, trying to guess the prison's schedule, as if that mattered here. He peeked through the slot, expecting guards, alarms, anything. But all he saw was endless fog. Thick, silent, suffocating fog. He rattled the door, yelling for help, each shout disappearing into the mist. Then, with a slow, metallic groan, the door swung open by itself. Dante stared, stunned. Why would a cell door in hell be unlocked? He stepped out cautiously and found himself on an abandoned walkway, surrounded by an ocean of concrete ruins swallowed by fog. The scale of the place hit him like a hammer. This wasn't a prison. It was an entire city, an endless slum carved into the underworld. His sanity wavered. He screamed that none of this could be real. He spun toward his cellmate, desperate for answers. But a hand clamped over his mouth before he could shout again. The masked prisoner had followed, visibly irritated. His warning was cold and simple. You can't leave, so stop yelling and live. Dante stared out over the decaying metropolis, trembling. How could anyone survive in a place like this? He grabbed the prisoner, insisting he was a law-abiding citizen, not like the monsters down below. He declared he was nothing like society's trash. His arrogance remained perfectly intact. Suddenly, a towering muscular creature materialized behind his cellmate, like a phantom of rage. The masked prisoner seemed more confused than offended by Dante's words, but the beast looming behind him was a different story entirely. Its enormous chest rose and fell with restrained fury, and its hooded face glowed with a pair of cold, luminous eyes. Dante panicked, waving his hands, trying to clarify that his insult was not directed at his cellmate. But the masked prisoner leaned forward aggressively, demanding to know what Dante was staring at. Behind him, the hulking creature drew back its arm, preparing to strike. The limb was thicker than Dante's whole body. A massive fist flew forward and crashed into Dante with a sickening thud. He hit the ground hard, battered and bleeding. His pride vanished instantly. The masked prisoner calmly settled beside Dante's injured body, reminding him that he had warned him to be quiet. He then muttered a strange complaint about his clothes being gone. When Dante regained consciousness, he erupted in outrage, yelling at his cellmate for provoking a monster. He insisted through shaking breaths that the thing which attacked him was missing an arm. Then, without warning, the masked inmate began unbuttoning his jumpsuit. Dante's imagination leapt straight to the worst possible conclusion, and he shouted a stream of frantic apologies. Completely ignoring his panic, the prisoner tossed the jumpsuit aside. Dante stared in disbelief as the prisoner revealed a sculpted build. The prisoner ordered him to wear the jumpsuit. Dante hesitated, stunned, unsure if this was a bizarre prank or some strange form of kindness. Realizing he had no better option, he scrambled into the orange uniform. He paused, worrying that rescue teams might not recognize him dressed like an inmate. His cellmate quickly crushed that hope, stating that nobody would come to save him. The only rule here was to avoid standing out. The masked prisoner then grabbed a dirty brown uniform from a heap of rubbish and pulled it on like it was perfectly normal. With a bag over his head and rags on his body, he announced that it was dinner time. Dante stared at him blankly, unimpressed by the attire. Suddenly, a hopeful thought struck him. If it was mealtime, guards would appear. He could explain everything and be rescued. But before he could celebrate, a strange, melodic hum drifted across the desolate prison city. The sound reverberated through the empty streets like a haunting lullaby. Somewhere else within the fog, a massive prisoner gleefully admired himself in Dante's stolen suit, grumbled that he should have taken the teacher's stylish glasses as well. A new figure approached them, casually asking where the hooded man had found his outfit. The suited prisoner let out a terrified scream and immediately bowed in submission, calling the newcomer boss. The hooded man informed the boss that a new four-eyed nerd had wandered into their territory. Intrigued, the boss asked for confirmation. The suited prisoner proudly announced that he personally stole the clothing from the newcomer. His reward came in the form of a blade rammed straight through his skull. The man died with confusion still frozen on his face. Blood sprayed across the ground as the boss withdrew the weapon and delivered his message with chilling certainty. Drenched in the blood of his own followers, he smiled. He had found his target at last. He raised his soaked blade, pronouncing Dante's name with grim satisfaction. Meanwhile, the prisoners gathered in a crumbling concrete plaza for their daily meal. Strange, camouflage figures hid among the ruins, watching with glowing, predatory eyes. Their bodies were barely human. Their hunger was unmistakable. Dante followed close behind his cellmate, horrified by the creatures around him. He whispered shaky questions, wondering if these beings were even human. A crow with a single glowing eye perched above them on a rusted monument, surveying the lawless chaos below. Bloodied poles and rotting bodies lined the walkways. a horrifying reminder of Fogland's true nature. This was no orderly correctional facility. It was a predatory jungle disguised as a prison, an endless slum suffocating in mist. Dante trembled as he pointed at the bodies, hoping desperately that they were merely morbid decorations. He grabbed his cellmate's arm and demanded to know how something controlled by the United Nations could devolve into this nightmare. The masked prisoner silenced him instantly, warning him to lower his voice unless he wanted to die. Dante's thoughts spiraled. He chastised himself for ever trusting this creature. He remembered the glowing eyes from the classroom. His cellmate had the same unnatural glint, absorbing everything he can easily understand. In the place like this, trust did not exist. After some time, Dante and his cellmate reached the Chow Hall, a crumbling structure that resembled a battlefield cafeteria more than a dining facility. Yet inside, the atmosphere was surprisingly controlled. Rows of inmates in orange jumpsuits ate quietly, following an unspoken routine. Dante blinked in disbelief. For a place drowning in chaos, mealtime looked strangely civilized. He got in line with the others, the smell of food giving him a faint sense of hope. If food existed, then someone had to be managing it. And then he saw it. A uniform. A guard's uniform. A figure stood ahead, his face obscured by shadow. Dante almost sobbed with relief. There was still order here. There were still people in charge. He just needed to stay calm and act like a civilized human being. His cellmate, however, was only concerned with securing extra ham. Priorities apparently differed. When the creature in front of him moved along, Dante finally stepped forward, heart pounding. He asked the man if he was truly a guard. The figure gave a stiff nod, confirming his role without saying a word. Dante exhaled shakily and introduced himself, spilling out everything at once. He explained he was a teacher named Kang Dante and pointed directly at his cellmate, claiming the masked prisoner had dragged him here during the riot. He begged the guard to call for help, certain that people were searching for the missing teacher. Then a thin line of drool slid down the guard's chin. Dante froze. The man's eyes were vacant, hollow, mindless. Not a guard at all, but a lunatic wrapped in stolen authority. Before Dante could react, the guard lifted his serving ladle and smacked him, ordering him forward like a misbehaving dog. Dante was shoved off with a tray of unidentifiable mush. Defeated, he slumped next to his cellmate, who ate happily without noticing anything unusual. Dante scanned the room. No other officers. No order, no salvation. The truth hit him hard. He was completely trapped. The masked prisoner's earlier warning echoed in his head. No one would ever come. Desperate for any lifeline, Dante turned to his cellmate and addressed him as a student. His expression warped into a wild grin as he mentioned sweet potatoes. At last, he had leverage. He offered to teach the masked inmate everything about growing the plant, but only if the creature helped him escape. In Dante's mind, it was a flawless strategy. He could manipulate his cellmate, use his simplicity against him, and get out of this nightmare. He flashed his most convincing smile. His cellmate stared at him, then asked if Dante honestly thought he was stupid. Dante flailed verbally, trying to justify his plan, but the prisoner's gaze remained unreadable. Finally, the masked inmate explained the only way out. To leave Fogland, Dante would need to rise to the highest position in the entire prison, the supreme leader of the underworld. Dante repeated the ridiculous title, trying to understand what that meant. His cellmate immediately crushed his hope, saying someone like Dante would not last a single day. But a chilling realization crept into Dante's mind. If that title was the only path to the outside world, then it might be his only chance. The masked prisoner raised a piece of food, providing a grim ultimatum: rise to power or perish. Dante demanded a real answer, but his cellmate simply told him to be quiet. Finally snapping, Dante slammed his hand on the table and stood. If his cellmate refused to help him, then he would find another way out. He shouted about his family, insisting they needed him. But as he stormed away, a sudden voice called out. A prisoner shouted for a teacher. He spun around in shock. A crowd had gathered at the Chow Hall entrance. A wave of relief washed over him. These had to be rescuers. They must have been sent to find him. Dante ran toward them, screaming his name, his occupation, begging for help. Tears streamed down his face. He was certain the nightmare was over. But as the crowd stepped aside, his hope died instantly. The figures at the entrance were not rescuers, they were prisoners. And in front stood his former students. The one leading them smiled with a grin sharp enough to cut stone. Dante felt his soul crumble. The towering inmate leaned down and greeted him like an old acquaintance. He casually mentioned the sweet potato lesson as if it had been a pleasant memory. Dante nodded weakly, staring up at the monstrous figure. He remembered the first time he had seen this giant, his impossibly broad shoulders, his terrifying presence. The other prisoners addressing him as an enforcer. Dante realized he was face to face with one of Fogland's infamous 6 enforcers. The Tower of a Man revealed a monstrous grin, and with that, Dante's memory replayed the classroom slaughter in vivid detail. He remembered with clarity how this towering inmate had dealt with the security forces. The tactical squad had unleashed a hail of bullets meant to wipe out every prisoner in the room. He could still see the moment a guard's head detonated in a crimson burst. Yet the giant standing before him had not only survived the onslaught, he had dismantled the squad with terrifying ease. He recalled the monster's blood-smeared grin as he scolded the guards for their lack of manners. If they were going to bring weapons into a classroom, then he would respond in kind. Dante remembered the impossible sight of the tower. The prisoner carved through the tactical team in a single sweeping motion. The memory drove Dante to his knees, his entire body trembling. He stared up at the towering figure now looming above him and managed to choke out a question, asking why he was being hunted. The tower's response chilled him to the bone. It was time to continue their lesson, but this time he wanted a real lesson, not something as harmless as sweet potatoes. Grinning wildly, the giant revealed 3 glowing blue spheres in the palm of his hand, demanding to know how to make fog. The surrounding inmates erupted with unhinged excitement, chanting the word fog with their shining eyes. Dante stared at the pulsating blue lumps, completely overwhelmed. And then it dawned on him. He remembered his cellmate shouting the same word earlier. He finally understood that these glowing orbs were the substance they had been talking about. He asked what the fog was supposed to be. The tower's grin vanished, replaced with shock. Furious that a science teacher did not recognize it, he grabbed Dante by the jumpsuit. Dante stammered that he had never seen anything like this, that it wasn't something covered in school textbooks. The tower revealed the worst truth of all. All 6 of the legendary shoulders had gathered because they believed Dante could teach them about the fog. They had dragged him into this prison for that purpose alone. Dante's mind reeled, but the tower ignored his distress, shoving 1 glowing orb toward his mouth. The lesson was going to begin immediately. Dante stared at the quivering sphere, paralyzed with dread. Then the tower rammed the orb between his teeth. The entire Chow Hall watched with haunting fascination, drool dripping from their lips as if they were witnessing a sacred ritual. In a burst of panic, Dante shoved the tower backward. The orbs flew through the air and scattered across the floor. The room fell silent. Every prisoner turned toward Dante, their glowing eyes fixed on him. He knew he had made a catastrophic mistake. An elderly inmate stared in despair at the wasted fog. Then the crowd erupted into feral chaos, hurling themselves at the fallen orbs like ravenous animals. Dante watched in horror as the prisoners tore into one another for even a fragment of the precious substance. The tower calmly explained that the fog was the most valuable material in this place, a divine blessing worth more than all the gold in the world. One old man managed to swallow a piece. Immediately, the crowd turned on him. Dante watched, sickened, as they ripped into the man's flesh to consume the power he now held. A strange blue glow pulsed from the old man's body, yet his expression was one of blissful serenity as they devoured him. This prison was completely insane. A long-haired inmate with a chilling smile mocked the chaos. He explained that consuming enough fog granted overwhelming strength and supernatural abilities. The tower opened his mouth to show his own blue glow and asked Dante if he was interested. Dante's body began to tremble, a faint blue flicker running through him. His stomach twisted violently and he collapsed, vomiting on the floor. Broken and sobbing, he begged to be taken home. The tower watched in disappointment. Dante protested that he was only a high school teacher, not a scientist capable of producing the fog. The long-haired inmate scoffed and claimed he had seen an expert do it in a television drama. Something inside Dante snapped. He screamed that he was not a genius or a miracle worker. He was just an ordinary teacher. The long-haired prisoner's expression darkened as he stepped closer. He accused Dante of being incompetent and worthless. The words hit Dante like a punch. The prisoner, furious at his own shattered expectations, grabbed a fog-infused blade and plunged it into his own mouth. Blue light seeped past his lips as he absorbed its power. Pulling the blade out, he declared Dante a failure, completely useless. The insult tore open an old wound. Dante remembered being called worthless before. He remembered the disappointed eyes of his parents, their cold judgment burning into him. They told him he had disgraced the family name, that only failures became teachers. He recalled kneeling while they criticized his 6 years of academic attempts. His father was a world-famous figure, his mother a brilliant legal scholar, his brother a prodigy admired everywhere he went. Dante, despite being a respected educator in his own classroom, had never been anything more than a disappointment at home. A memory flickered through his mind, the suffocating silence of a family dinner. His father, seated at the head of the table like a judge, questioned the suspicious job proposal from an international prison. His brother answered instead, grinning smugly as he described it as a United Nations teaching post with fantastic pay. He spoke with unsettling excitement, calling Fogland the perfect place for the most unhinged people on Earth. Dante's reaction back then had been the same naive line he always gave. People lived there after all. His mother had frowned, asking why he needed to travel so far. His father, stern and intimidating, demanded a justification. Dante had only been able to sweat nervously, confused as to why they were so strongly opposed. He tried explaining his personal philosophy, that everyone deserved a chance to learn. His brother responded by spitting red wine across the table, laughing as though it were a joke, then pretending it was an accident. Once the humor drained from his face, he delivered a cruel lecture about Dante's lack of professionalism. He claimed Dante's noble mission was nothing but a desperate attempt to look important. He accused Dante of using dramatic decisions to disguise his incompetence. Dante had sat frozen as his brother feigned concern for his foolishness. Then his father delivered the final blow. He dismissed Dante's idealism as nothing more than weak insecurity, insisting that making such reckless choices proved his stupidity. Dante in the memory could only nod along, unable to fight those harsh words. Suddenly, a makeshift blade swung downward. Dante's awareness fractured. Terror emptied his mind as the impact slammed him against the stone floor. The tower raised his weapon again, preparing to strike. But before the blow could fall, the one-armed prisoner intervened. With astonishing speed, he twisted his body and sent his metal fork hurtling across the hall. The weapon buried itself deep into the tower's side, the sound echoing like a muted explosion. Blood splashed across Dante's face as he lay helpless on the floor, barely comprehending the savagery unfolding before him. The tower clutched his wounds, howling in pain, unable to understand how the attack had come so swiftly. In his confusion, he demanded to know who had brought a gun into the hall, misinterpreting the blur of movement and impact. The one-armed prisoner offered no explanation. Instead, he launched another barrage of brutally efficient strikes. His lone arm moved so fast that it became only a streak, forcing the massive inmate backward with each devastating blow. Prisoners around them watched in shocked silence as the supposed titan of Cell Zero began to collapse. The final strike landed with a brutal crack, shattering the tower's spine. A powerful kick sent the giant's body flying before he crashed heavily onto the floor. The unthinkable had occurred. The tower, the symbol of dominance in Cell Zero, had fallen. The Chow Hall erupted into chaos. Inmates surged forward, shouting over one another. They demanded the victor's name, referring to him as the new shoulder, the new ruler of their violent hierarchy. The one-armed prisoner ignored every roar and every demand. Instead, he turned his attention to Dante. He addressed him calmly, telling him that it was time to leave. Then, without effort, he lifted the weakened teacher onto his shoulder and began walking out of the hall. The prisoners stepped aside, whispering among themselves, remarking that the victor seemed to be choosing the teacher as someone significant. Outside, Dante crumpled to his knees as the reality of his survival swept over him. Tremors ran through his body as relief overwhelmed him. The one-armed prisoner regarded him closely, suspicion flickering in his eyes. He questioned whether Dante had lied earlier about the sweet potato. Dante's panicked response only confused him further, prompting the one-armed prisoner to clarify his reasoning. He explained in simple terms that he had originally joined the correctional training line only because he had been told new clothes would be given out. A memory surfaced. Earlier, the one-armed prisoner had attempted to walk past a long line of inmates, uninterested in whatever they were queuing for. An inmate had stopped him, insisting that cutting in line wasn't allowed, and explaining that the crowd was waiting for the new correctional program. When the one-armed prisoner showed no intention of joining, the man had excitedly mentioned that the program offered new clothing. That detail alone had made the one-armed prisoner pause, giving him a rare spark of anticipation that something valuable might be obtained. Back in the present, Dante struggled to understand the one-armed prisoner's motives. He could not comprehend why the man had intervened to save him. The one-armed prisoner clarified his reasoning in a cold, matter-of-fact manner. He indicated that he had not rescued Dante at all, only the new clothes he believed Dante had endangered. He pointed at the jumpsuit Dante was now wearing, emphasizing that Dante had provided no value as a teacher and had, in fact, urinated on his newly acquired uniform. Feeling indebted, Dante somehow managed to obtain another jumpsuit to compensate for the damage. He hurried to wash the soiled clothes belonging to the one-armed prisoner, promising to return them promptly. While working, he noticed that the one-armed prisoner still wore his old, tattered uniform. Dante wondered aloud if the ragged garment held sentimental significance. The one-armed prisoner simply indicated the faded numbers stitched onto the old fabric, insisting that it bore the digits 182, and therefore belonged to him. With the same logic, he pointed at the clean jumpsuit Dante wore, also marked with the same number, and declared that it, too, was his property. Completely misunderstanding the reasoning, Dante assumed the old uniform was emotionally important to its owner. Determined to treat it carefully, he washed the rags with even greater urgency, muttering curses under his breath at the absurd situation. When the laundry was finally hung to dry in the heavy, damp atmosphere of Fogland, Dante collapsed in exhaustion. The biting cold and persistent hunger gnawed at him. He eventually uncovered a single sweet potato, a pitiful but precious piece of food. His starvation tempted him to eat immediately, but he froze when he noticed the one-armed prisoner hanging upside down from the upper bunk, his luminous eyes fixed on the vegetable. The man growled a hostile warning, making it clear that he considered the sweet potato off-limits. Dante tried to negotiate, explaining his hunger and asking for a small portion, but the one-armed prisoner rejected the plea without hesitation. He seized the sweet potato and revealed that he had carved his own number into its surface, marking it as his possession. When Dante protested that the man did not even know how to cultivate food, the one-armed prisoner responded by polishing the vegetable with great care, issuing a calm but deadly threat. If the sweet potato were harmed, the responsible party would die. As the one-armed prisoner guarded his prize with fierce, primitive protectiveness, Dante realized the man's childlike simplicity could be exploited. A plan began forming in Dante's mind. He approached the situation like a lecture. He suggested that the sweet potato might already be doomed, explaining that carving the number could have infected it. To strengthen the deception, he invented a condition called browning, claiming the vegetable would soon rot unless treated. The one-armed prisoner's eyes widened in alarm as he leaned in, desperate for a cure. Dante pretended to hesitate before offering a remedy. He explained that the sweet potato required direct sunlight to recover, but Fogland's suffocating fog prevented enough light from reaching it, even inside their cell. He added that they needed to move somewhere with thinner fog. With his trap now set, Dante concluded that the one-armed prisoner would have to reach the gate in front of the fortress, the very entrance to Fogland itself. Elsewhere, in a grimy workshop, one of the tower's subordinates hammered furiously at the giant's damaged neck brace. The subordinate asked how long recovery would take, but the tower snarled back in frustration. Another inmate claimed confidently that they had brought the best architect for repairs. The tower reacted with fury, demanding a doctor instead and demanding to know what had happened. His mind could not process the truth. His own neck, reinforced like steel, had been broken by a single strike from the one-armed prisoner. Hatred twisted the tower's expression as he vowed to capture the one-armed newcomer. He assumed the teacher must have led the man somewhere valuable and concluded that Dante would now face a grim fate. A cold, smooth voice interrupted his rant. A figure stepped from the shadows. He mocked the tower's injuries as he entered the hideout. The architect objected, reminding him that their groups had formed an alliance to share resources. The tower refused to back down and declared his intention to become supreme leader himself. The boss dismissed this ambition with a cruel laugh, remarking that the tower's dreams far exceeded his abilities. When the boss lifted his weapon, the tower protested, calling the attack cowardly given his injured state. The boss ignored the plea, driven by pure malice. With a vicious downward swing, he shattered the reinforced brace and crushed the tower's skull in a single blow. Another shoulder fell. Another power shifted. In the distant outskirts of Fogland, the aftermath of another massacre stained the floor a deep crimson. Amid the carnage stood a lone inmate with a sprawling, ominous tattoo across his back. Around him, a motorcycle gang of prisoners, each with glowing, unnatural eyes, stood watch. Their leader, marked by a large wolf skull tattoo, declared their territory as Tofu Village. Engines roared as the group sped through the desolate prison roads. At the same time, Dante walked uneasily beside Prisoner Zero, who carried a heavy sack pressed protectively against his chest. The masked man issued a low, territorial growl, indicating that the contents belonged to him alone. Dante cautiously asked whether the sack happened to have the number 182 written on it. Attempting to build some connection, he addressed the man politely and inquired about his name. The response he received was bleak and literal. The prisoner identified himself simply as One Arm. The bluntness stunned Dante. He struggled to accept that anyone would willingly adopt such a name and declared that he preferred calling him Mr. 182 instead. Unable to restrain his curiosity, Dante began bombarding his companion with questions about his mask, his past, and how he had ended up in Fogland. The only answer he received was silence, which felt far more ominous than words. Abruptly, the one-armed prisoner turned and demanded to know why Dante asked so many questions. He argued that teachers were supposed to provide answers, not seek them. Dante attempted to explain that teachers were human and naturally curious, but his justification was cut short when the prisoner complained that Dante talked too much and was too loud. With a dismissive turn of his head, the one-armed prisoner made it clear that he wanted silence. Time dragged painfully as they continued down the broken road. Eventually, Dante collapsed onto the cracked pavement, overwhelmed by fatigue and hunger. He lamented that they had been walking for 2 hours, only to encounter the same path repeatedly. When he realized the one-armed prisoner had been aware of their aimless wandering from the start, Dante's weariness flared into outrage. He accused his silent companion of letting them walk in circles for no reason and threw himself dramatically onto the ground, declaring that he couldn't move another step. He demanded either to be carried or to be given something to eat. Before his complaints could escalate, the one-armed prisoner suddenly listed to the side and collapsed. Dante's frustration evaporated instantly, replaced by panic. As the man's mask slipped off, it revealed an alarmingly pale face and empty, unfocused eyes. A single tear slid down the prisoner's cheek as he lost consciousness. Dante screamed the man's number in terror and rushed to his side. He frantically asked if the prisoner was sick or injured, begging him not to die and not to leave him alone in the ruined wasteland. His desperation grew uncontrollable, and he shook the unresponsive body while shouting pleas for the man to open his eyes. In the midst of Dante's panic, the ground behind him erupted. A massive, caped figure descended from above, landing with such force that the concrete shattered beneath him. Dante froze in terror. The towering newcomer crouched down, studying him with unnerving calm, and gently brushed a hand across Dante's cheek as if examining him. The stranger noted with curiosity that Dante appeared to be an ordinary human. Confused and trembling, Dante attempted to apologize, unsure of what offense he might have committed. The stranger merely smiled, withdrew his hand, and stated that he had come only because he was intrigued by the disturbance. The scene shifted to a rough, improvised kitchen tucked away in the ruins. Dante hunched over a makeshift table, devouring bread with frantic hunger. Someone scolded him lightly for eating too quickly, the tone strangely parental. His rescuers, a spiky-haired man and a blue-haired woman, assured him there was plenty more. Gratitude flooded Dante. For the first time since entering Fogland, he was surrounded by what looked like real human beings. The spiky-haired man introduced himself as Rambutan, and the woman beside him as Lichi. Dante offered his name in return, relieved to finally hold a normal conversation. His eyes widened when he realized Lichi was a woman. Rambutan chuckled at his surprise, teasing him for assuming otherwise. Lichi explained she cut her hair to avoid drawing attention in a place like Tofu Village. Rambutan told him they came from the inner regions of the prison, places where the facility's original structure had completely collapsed. Dante asked if the center was full of normal people, but Rambutan shook his head. Tofu Village, he said, was for outcasts. The discussion shifted to fog, and Rambutan asked if Dante was new to the substance. Dante explained the truth at last. He was not an inmate. He had been kidnapped. Rambutan's jaw dropped. Being kidnapped into Fogland made no sense. But as the pieces clicked together, dread settled over the group. Dante realized they somehow knew about the teacher kidnapping incident. Rambutan stared at him, stunned to meet the central figure of the operation, then cautiously asked if Dante was some kind of spy. Lichi interrupted, pointing out that Dante's cellmate did not look like any enforcer. Dante then revealed the absurd truth behind his abduction. He had been kidnapped for a lesson on growing sweet potatoes. Both Rambutan and Lichi burst into uncontrollable laughter. Dante managed a weak smile while tears streamed down his face, relieved to find people who still had empathy left in this wasteland. Lichi gently told Rambutan to stop teasing him because Dante was crying again. Rambutan asked if Dante was their captive, but Dante clarified that he was simply traveling with a makeshift bodyguard. He added that the man had not attacked him but had collapsed suddenly, which he assumed was heat stroke. Lichi corrected him, giving the condition a name that sent a chill through Dante's entire body: limbo. She explained that it was a withdrawal state caused by lack of fog, the substance running the entire prison's ecosystem. Those catatonic prisoners Dante had seen earlier were all suffering from the same affliction. They could recover, but repeated episodes would eventually erode their minds completely. Finally, Dante asked the question that had haunted him since the Chow Hall riot. What exactly was fog? Rambutan and Lichi stared at him, stunned that anyone could be this uninformed. Dante's expression made it clear he truly had no idea what nightmare he had fallen into. Rambutan answered at last. Fog was a divine medicine, a substance that awakened potential. It could bring out hidden talents or grant powers one desperately desired. Dante struggled to believe it, but Rambutan insisted it allowed people to surpass human limits. Standing beside him, Lichi nodded and declared that the two of them planned to use its power to escape Fogland. Dante's breath caught in his throat. For the first time, escape felt real. Somewhere deep in Fogland, a muscular figure marked with an enormous back tattoo stood motionless in a darkened corridor. His shadow stretched across a ruined cell, claiming the space as if it belonged to him. He muttered quietly, certain his quarry could not have wandered far. His voice low and confident, he reaffirmed his mission. The teacher was still somewhere within his reach. Elsewhere in the labyrinth of broken concrete, a creature known only as the Bone Eater crouched over a fresh corpse, gnawing contentedly. The territory was growing more dangerous by the hour. Back in Tofu Village, Rambutan explained the hierarchy of this forsaken district. 3 monstrous rulers controlled everything. First was Nunface, a nightmarish thing notorious for its cruelty. The second was Fuzzyback, a towering beast who commanded the prison's crows. The third was Drillhead, a terrifying leader among the outcasts. These 3 governed Tofu Village with absolute authority. But Rambutan and Lichi refused to accept this hopeless world. They explained their plan to Dante. Use the fog's power to break out of Fogland altogether. The word escape struck Dante with overwhelming force. It was an option he had never dared to imagine. They officially invited him to join them. For a heartbeat, Dante felt genuine hope. Then his logical mind began to churn. He politely refused, insisting that his priority as a civilian was to find the guards. In his thinking, helping prisoners flee would make him a criminal, and he insisted he could not cross that line. His earnest rule following would have been admirable anywhere except Fogland. Rambutan explained the true stakes. If their escape attempt failed, they would not simply be punished. They would disappear forever, erased without explanation. Nobody outside would search for them. The world had chosen to forget Fogland entirely. He added one more warning. Fog addiction awaited anyone who stayed too long. Dante panicked, swearing he would never touch fog. Convinced he was safe from it, Rambutan corrected him gently. It was not a choice. He asked if Dante had noticed the mist filling the air. Then he revealed the unsettling truth. The fog drifting through the city was made of microscopic fog particles. Dante froze. He had been breathing the drug since the moment he arrived. Fog, the substance granting impossible power, was entering his lungs with every breath. Rambutan explained that manifesting special abilities required a great deal of the substance. Addiction, however, came from something as simple as breathing. Each inhale planted the particles in his body, creating a growing hunger that would eventually take over his mind. The craving would intensify until the victim became irrational, violent, and desperate. Dante stared at them with widening eyes, finally understanding why his cellmate had collapsed into unconsciousness. Without a steady supply, a person would fall into limbo. Dante's voice cracked as he asked if he was already addicted. The answer was obvious, written plainly across his panicked face. He was far from safe. He tried to rationalize it, clinging to any scrap of hope. Maybe there was still a chance. Maybe an antidote could be made if someone discovered the truth. But Rambutan shook his head. Limbo was only the beginning. Everyone had different levels of resistance, but eventually the fog claimed them all. Dante asked the final, trembling question. Was escape still possible now that they were already hooked? Lychee answered with brutal honesty. Yes, they were addicted. And no one had ever left Fogland alive. The news sank into Dante's bones. But when he looked at Rambutan and Lychee, he saw something unexpected. They shared a silent promise. A vision of a future under a clear, open sky. A life without cages, without mist, without fear. Their bond was real, their hope unshakable. As they embraced their shared dream, a pair of glowing eyes blinked from the shadows of the bed. Dante froze as he realized their conversation had not been private. Rambutan and Lychee stiffened, their hopeful expressions vanishing. The masked prisoner slowly sat up, tension radiating from him. Dante's heart thundered in his chest. His sweet potato bargain was useless now. He wondered if the man would turn on them for discussing escape. He remembered the nightmarish violence this creature could unleash. The prisoner rose from the bed, moving with a slow, ominous deliberation. Instead of attacking, he simply held up a sweet potato and asked if it was safe to go outside. Dante nearly collapsed from relief and confusion. Lychee noticed Dante's terror and asked why he looked so afraid. She clearly had no idea who they were sharing the room with. Rambutan dismissed the prisoner as a harmless fog addict, incapable of doing anything until his next dose. Dante swallowed hard. They had no idea how wrong they were. He offered to handle his cellmate, trying to shield his new friends. But the prisoner's arm suddenly swelled with inhuman strength. He seized Rambutan by the throat, calmly asking whether he should kill him now. His glowing eyes radiated cold fury, promising absolute destruction. Rambutan's confidence shattered as he dangled helplessly in the prisoner's grip. Dante realized they had severely misjudged his cellmate. He rushed forward, pleading for him to stop. He kept repeating that murder was unnecessary and begged him to release Rambutan. The tension broke. The prisoner loosened his hold. Dante announced that he wanted to leave and that their partnership was officially over. The prisoner seemed entirely unfazed. He only wanted to finish the sweet potato lesson. Seeing an opportunity, Dante took the vegetable from his hand. He instructed Lychee to fill a cup with water. Then he placed the sweet potato in it and delivered a formal explanation, demonstrating how the process worked and stressing the importance of sunlight. He patted his cellmate's shoulder and encouraged him to take his new plant friend outside. The prisoner admitted he did not know the way, and Dante sheepishly confessed he did not either. Desperate, Dante shouted at Rambutan to get rid of the prisoner so they could escape together. Rambutan and Lychee exchanged a grim look, united in their resolve. In the chaos, the cup tipped over, sending the sweet potato rolling across the floor. Water spread across the cracked concrete. The lesson ended before it had even begun. Poor prisoner suddenly collapsed forward, hitting the ground hard. He slowly lifted his head. His expression was not one of pain, but of solemn realization. A bright blue glow flickered in his eye, the unmistakable light of the fog. A memory rose unbidden in the prisoner's mind, soft and blurry around the edges. He saw himself as a child, sitting beside a girl in a dim room, lit only by the glow of a flickering, static-filled television. The girl pointed at the grainy shapes on the screen, her voice gentle as she explained that the strange moving figures were animals from the outside world. Cats and dogs, she said. Creatures that were warm and fluffy and kind. Creatures that understood their owners and would run to them when called. The younger version of him stared, captivated. He had never seen such beings in Fogland. In that moment, he made a small promise to himself. If he ever escaped this endless maze of concrete, he would raise a puppy of his own. A simple dream, but a precious one. The memory slipped away. Back in the present, he reached toward the sweet potato lying forgotten on the floor. It was not a pet, not a real companion, but it was something he could hold, something he could care for. Meanwhile, deep within the wreckage of the shanty town, two of the boss's subordinates examined a long, smeared trail of blood across the ground. They measured its width, 20 centimeters, and wondered aloud if the creature that left it had shifted position. Their attention then drifted upward to a grotesque sight, the broken remains of an inmate dangling from the grip of a monstrous, hulking figure. He remarked that the prisoner had attempted an escape, but appeared to be trapped within the boundaries of the Foglands. At the same time, inside the cramped cell where Dante now shared space with his new companions, his anxiety surged. Turning to Rambutan and Lychee, he asked what their escape strategy was. Rambutan responded by lowering himself into a crouch, immense tension coiling through his legs as crackling force rippled across the floor. The concrete beneath him began to fracture. Dante could only watch in horrified amazement as Rambutan tightened his fists, every muscle bunching in preparation for a catastrophic release of power. With a thunderous roar, Rambutan propelled himself upward. His leap shattered the entire roof of the cell, sending dust and debris cascading down as Dante screamed in shock at the unimaginable force behind the jump. He and Lychee stared at the gaping hole overhead, struggling to comprehend what they had just witnessed. Through the swirling dust, Lychee explained calmly that Rambutan possessed a remarkable talent for vertical leaps and that their plan relied on this ability. They intended to vault over the prison walls. The trio soon moved across the interconnected rooftops of Fogland's outer district, navigating the sprawling ruins with cautious urgency. Suddenly, Lychee halted. Her eyes glowed with a brilliant white light as she lifted a hand, psychically surveying the vast expanse ahead of them. When the vision ended, she knelt on the concrete and began to sketch with extraordinary speed. In mere moments, a perfectly detailed map of the shanty town emerged, drawn with photographic accuracy. Dante stared in disbelief, marveling at her ability to recreate a scene after seeing it only once. He asked whether she had mapped the entirety of Fogland. Lychee shook her head gently and clarified that the drawing represented only the portion she had recorded during her journey from the central district. The implication stunned Dante. Fogland was unimaginably massive, its true boundaries stretching far beyond what he had imagined. Lychee pointed to their current location and suggested that, based on the size of Tofu Village, they might be nearing the outer edge. Dante leaned over the map, initially praising her precision before crudely adding 4 stick figures onto a nearby building to represent potential threats. 4 vagrants he remembered encountering. Lychee recoiled in irritation at the crude addition, but Dante insisted that marking dangers was necessary. He then gestured toward a large red stain drawn on the map, asking what such a mark represented. At this, both Rambutan and Lychee tensed. Their expressions darkened with unspoken fear, and whatever optimism they had carried evaporated instantly. Dante attempted to lift their spirits by reminding them that they would soon be free of Fogland. Rambutan then asked Lychee which direction they needed to go. Lychee pointed, identifying the safest route. With renewed urgency, Rambutan swept up both Dante and Lychee in his arms. Without hesitation, he launched them into another massive leap, carrying the entire group soaring across the fractured rooftops toward the distant boundary of the Foglands. In a shadow-drenched alley on the outskirts of the shanty town, a cluster of starving inmates huddled against a broken wall. Their limbs were skeletal, their eyes dulled by hunger. One of them noticed a solitary figure approaching and croaked out a plea, asking if the newcomer carried any fog. As all eyes turned toward him, the sight of the one-armed prisoner awakened something feral within them. One inmate immediately scoffed, questioning why such a fool would wander into a place filled with desperation. The one-armed prisoner repeated his question about fog and instructed them to empty their pockets, his tone flat and emotionless. That command snapped the largest inmate's restraint. In a burst of rage, the hulking man charged forward and began pummeling the one-armed prisoner, shouting that he was starving and accusing the newcomer of inviting death. Another inmate, eyes glazed with hunger and madness, brandished a spoon like a blade. He muttered that he was starving too and leaned close to the bloodied one-armed prisoner, whispering a rumor that fog could be extracted from human flesh, and that the notorious bone eater fed on people to obtain it. The rest of the group froze, unsettled by the thought of cannibalism. They mumbled about waiting for mealtime, but the spoon-wielding inmate erupted in fury, calling them cowards for hesitating when fog might be within reach. The one-armed prisoner finally lifted his head and asked in an unbroken monotone where they intended to begin eating. The deranged inmate answered with grotesque enthusiasm, suggesting either tearing off his head to drink the blood or gouging out his eyes. A massive hand clamped around his wrist, stopping the spoon mere centimeters from the one-armed prisoner's face. A towering, muscular figure had appeared at the alley's entrance. In a single blur, the newcomer swatted the cannibal aside and then delivered a thunderous kick that sent the one-armed prisoner collapsing to his knees. Recognition swept through the crowd like lightning. Terror widened their eyes as they whispered the intruder's name, Hound. His imposing presence alone scattered the inmates as they fled in panic. Hound stood over the one-armed prisoner, radiating a cold, silent threat. He stared down at him and stated that he had finally found the one he sought. A memory flashed across Hound's mind. The control room drenched in blood, He remembered pulling Dante by the tie, slinging the terrified teacher over his shoulder, and carrying him out while chaos raged. A bitter anger simmered beneath his skin as he recalled the tower, using his subordinate as a human shield. A thin trail of glowing blue liquid slid down his cheek like a tear as he cursed the illusion of alliances. Soon he realized someone was trailing him. He quickened his pace, but the footsteps refused to fall away. He abruptly turned, facing the one-armed prisoner once more. Hound studied him suspiciously, questioning whether he served any of the Eater factions. In response, the one-armed prisoner simply lifted his precious sweet potato, asking if sweet potatoes counted as animals. Hound faltered in confusion. The prisoner added that perhaps the teacher would know the answer. Hound's temper broke completely. His fist tightened with fury. The one-armed prisoner tilted his head, asking if he should wake the teacher. That final remark made Hound snap. He hurled a punch directly toward the prisoner's skull. The one-armed prisoner moved faster. Hound's eyes widened. His blow had been stopped effortlessly. At the same moment, the one-armed prisoner's other hand darted out and snatched the sweet potato from Hound's grip. Treasure reclaimed. He pivoted and struck Hound across the ribs with a brutal kick before attempting to run off again, with Dante hanging limply over his shoulder. Reality snapped back. His voice trembled with rage as he demanding to know if the teacher doing well. The Hound yanked off the sack covering the one-armed prisoner's head and froze. He can't believe he had been looking for such a pathetic face. The one-armed prisoner immediately demanded fog, but instead of answering, the Hound hauled him across the room. He dragged him into a secluded den hidden behind metal crates, where several of his men waited. Without hesitation, they pinned the one-armed prisoner down and began torturing him, trying to force out the location of the teacher. The one-armed prisoner responded calmly that he would only speak if they gave him fog. His fingers were already shattered from the earlier interrogation, so the men shifted their attention to his toes. The Hound studied him closely and remarked that the prisoner's body was unnaturally durable, far beyond what was normal. He noted that a physique like that, combined with the ability to endure pain without reaction, meant something was deeply off about him. One of his men, Slick, voiced regret about breaking the previous alliance, claiming it had been a mistake, but the Hound shook his head and replied that anyone who harmed his people deserved retaliation. He swore that the death of their second-in-command would never be forgotten. To honor the fallen, the Hound took a long drink from a can of beer, but abruptly spit it out. His men rushed to him, asking if something was wrong. The Hound wiped his mouth and explained that his liver was severely damaged, and the injury had been inflicted by the very prisoner they were torturing. He ordered the one-armed prisoner to stand. He declared that the man wasn't fooling him, not for a second. The strike he had landed earlier hadn't been luck. It had been a trained hit. The Hound glanced down at the prisoner's footwear and narrowed his eyes. The technique, the movement, the stance. He questioned whether the one-armed prisoner had once been a soldier. Meanwhile, Dante and his group finally reached the outskirts of Fan. Dante insisted that they should leave immediately, but Rambutan raised a hand to stop him. He warned that a watchtower overlooked the main gate. If they walked toward it, they would be shot down instantly. But the warning did not come from any of them. It came from a bizarre creature, shaped vaguely like a sweet potato, lurking near the entrance. Dante stared at it, and recognition struck him. He remembered this odd individual from one of his classes long ago. Rambutan quickly stepped protectively in front of Dante. He warned him to stay back. They were standing before one of Fogland's elite leaders. This strange being was known as Drillhead. Just as Drillhead stretched out his hand to claim Dante, Rambutan surged forward with explosive force and drove a devastating kick into a cone-headed inmate. The impact sent the man hurtling across fractured concrete. Rambutan shot a fierce glare at the surrounding inmates, making it clear that the teacher would be leaving with him. The cone-headed inmate dragged himself upright, eerie blue light pulsing through his eyes. He demanded to know what Rambutan was. Bewildered by his strength, Rambutan stepped protectively in front of a trembling Dante and warned the stranger not to interfere, insisting he had found Dante first. The cone-headed man only sneered, mocking Rambutan for rushing in without fear. With unnatural grace, he rose onto his toes and began spinning, his movements unnervingly elegant, swift and precise like a dancer. Dante, horrified by the sight, realized the inmate was preparing to attack. He shouted a frantic warning. The ground split apart as the spinning inmate hurled himself forward like a living drill, carving a trench through the concrete as he blurred toward them. Dante let out a hysterical laugh of disbelief while Rambutan steadied himself for the incoming strike. The cone-headed attacker multiplied into a flurry of afterimages, taunting Rambutan with accusations of being too slow. Rambutan, however, moved effortlessly between the phantom assaults. At the moment he spotted an opening, he unleashed a thunderous axe kick, slamming his opponent face first into the ground and creating a crater beneath him. From a gathering crowd of onlookers, a woman's terrified cry rang out. It was Lychee, watching the fight unfold with horror. A group of ghoul-like inmates turned toward the sound, their glowing eyes widening. They whispered in shock, realizing a woman was present. Even the dazed, cone-headed attacker looked up in confusion. Before Lychee could escape, one of the inmates grabbed her, tearing open her jumpsuit. Their voices rose in frenzied excitement. They had found a real woman. Lychee screamed for them to release her as they swarmed around her. Dante watched in frozen terror, tears spilling down his cheeks as he whispered her name. Suddenly snapping out of his paralysis, Dante seized a chunk of broken concrete and hurled it at the mob. He shouted for them to stop. The stone bounced harmlessly off one inmate's head. The man glared at Dante, confused and annoyed. She seized Dante by the collar and tried to shake him into awareness, asking if he was all right. Dante stammered, panicked and helpless. Lychee pulled him along, dragging him away as the pair began to flee. From the shadows, a hulking inmate observed them with a disturbing curiosity, murmuring that the woman was attractive. Rambutan rose to intercept the brute, but the larger man ignored him entirely. With one contemptuous kick, he sent the cone-headed inmate flying out of his way and then sprinted after Lychee. Forced back onto the ground, Rambutan realized who the true target was and shouted Dante's name in a desperate warning. Drillhead seized Dante and dragged him into a hidden passage. They descended deeper and deeper through twisting tunnels until the air grew damp and the darkness thickened around them. At last, they reached a vast, subterranean cavern lit by shimmering blue veins of fog. Drillhead spread his arms wide and announced that Dante had arrived in his domain, the underground kingdom he ruled. Elsewhere, the Hound stood over the battered one-armed prisoner and revealed something unexpected. He too had once served in the Special Forces. After admitting this, he handed full authority over the prisoner to Slick, declaring that Slick would now be responsible for extracting information. Slick stared at the Hound with disdain. To him, the Hound was an incompetent leader, reckless, emotional, and blinded by revenge. Slick decided he could no longer remain beneath his command. He muttered that with enough mist, anyone could rise to become the supreme leader. Even Inko had the potential, even Bulk, even Slick himself. He claimed that with his intelligence, he could steer the world toward a new order, under his control. But before that happened, there was an obstacle to remove. He crouched in front of the one-armed prisoner and asked whether 182 would serve under him. If he agreed, he promised to give him fog, power, protection, and position in his future reign. As Slick prepared to swallow the mist orb himself, the one-armed prisoner didn't hesitate. With a sudden brutal snap, he lunged forward and tore the glowing chunk of mist straight out of Slick's throat, biting through flesh and swallowing it instantly. Slick collapsed immediately, hitting the ground like a lifeless weight, dead before he even realized what had happened. One inmate screamed his name. Another inmate shouted in panic that his throat had been slit. Chaos burst through the room. During the panic, the one-armed inmate swallowed the stolen fog orb in a single desperate gulp. Blue energy erupted violently through his body, his eyes glowing with raw, primal power as he loomed over Justice's corpse. Underground, Dante awoke beneath a dark wooden ceiling, his thoughts spiraling. Did Rambutan and Lychee escape? They must have gone ahead without him. In front of him sat the cone-headed inmate, elbows resting on his knees, surrounded by his odd followers. The man leaned in with a strange reverence in his eyes. The cone-headed inmate asked Teacher whether Teacher could really create fog. He explained that he had heard a rumor. The Tofu village man said Teacher summoned fog instantly and snapped the tower's neck. Dante stared blankly, confused by how such nonsense he could spread. The cone-headed man repeated his question more firmly, asking Teacher if it was true. Dante felt the pressure closing in. In his mind, his brother's cruel voice echoed, completely useless. Forcing down the panic, Dante met the man's gaze and answered that it was true. He launched into a desperate lie, saying that he once created an enormous fog, swallowed all of it at once, and the tower collapsed onto his thigh like the Leaning Tower of Pisa. The cone-headed inmate cut him off in fury. He shouted that Teacher should not lie to him and declared he was not as foolish as the other inmates. The word superstition lodged itself in Dante's thoughts. Before Dante could react, the cone-headed man continued. He said fog was never created by anyone. One day it simply fell from the sky like a divine gift. He recalled a piece of Fogland's history. 50 years ago, a massive meteorite crashed into the desert, shaking the world. That meteor, he said, was believed to be the source, a colossal sphere of energy that seeded the land with fog. He added gravely that rumors claimed the fog was running out. Dante processed the information, a limited resource, yet one that constantly cycled. The cone-headed inmate snapped his fingers. His men dragged in a pale, swollen corpse. Dante recoiled. "What is this?" he asked. The inmate explained calmly that it was someone who died after consuming fog. He crouched beside the body and asked Teacher whether fog could be separated from the person's blood. Dante could only stare in horror. The cone-headed man suggested using something like a maneuvering device. Dante muttered, "A centrifuge?" Eyes wide with manic excitement, the man insisted that people who absorbed a lot of fog must have it stored in their bodies. His men squeezed the corpse as he asked Teacher whether that seemed scientifically sound. Trying desperately to stall, Dante blurted out that it might be easier to open one's nostrils and inhale fog directly. The cone-headed inmate exploded, grabbing Dante by the collar. He roared that air could not simply be collected by breathing, that one had to gather it, scrape it together, compress it into a mass. The word struck Dante like lightning. Gather air. Compress it. He suddenly understood. Air could be collected, just like fog. A slow, unsettling grin spread across Dante's face. He told the cone-headed man that it was possible. That air could be gathered too. Elsewhere, Hound burst into his hideout, calling out that it was time for breakfast. But the room was silent. Bodies lay everywhere. His entire crew slaughtered, blood soaking the floor. His eyes darkened from white to crimson as grief crushed him. He fell to his knees and unleashed a guttural roar torn from the deepest pit of agony. A mournful scream echoed through the corridors, rolling toward the prison's chow hall, a place defined by routine misery and constant violence. The one-armed prisoner, limp and hollow-eyed, was dragged forward by 2 inmates into the food line. A prisoner wearing a dented metal bucket over his head snorted in disgust and demanded to know what was wrong with him. The one-armed prisoner muttered a single word through cracked lips. Water. Another inmate shoved him, snapping that he needed to get in line and follow the cafeteria rules. In an instant, the one-armed prisoner's arm lashed out. The slap landed like a gunshot, sending a spray of food across the room. Silence fell as he stared blankly through the ragged sack covering his face and repeated, "Water." Later, he isolated himself near the trash bins, cradling a glass of water in which he had placed his precious sweet potato. He watched it with quiet desperation, willing it to sprout. Elsewhere, Dante stood with the cone-headed inmate and his followers, holding a stretched sheet in the damp air. Shimmering droplets of blue liquid trickled down and splashed onto Dante's face. His eyes widened. He had done it. He had condensed fog out of thin air. While Dante smiled in triumph, the one-armed prisoner stared at the withered sweet potato in his glass. In a low voice, he murmured that it would never grow, that he had been full. From within his hood, a lone blue eye flared with cold resentment, extinguishing whatever innocence had lived there. Not far away, Lychee stared at Rambutan, startled by his bold declaration. He told her they would escape the prison together. Rambutan approached another inmate, hope shining in his expression, and urged him to join their escape plan. But the inmate's face hardened immediately. He drew a serrated blade and warned him to stop talking nonsense and leave. Unbothered, Rambutan simply turned away and said, "Okay." As the two walked through the rubble, he spoke softly to Lychee. He said that no matter how foolish or naive someone appeared in this place, everyone here knew that thing. He wiped the sweat from his temple and added grimly that Dante was the only exception, the only one who truly didn't know. Lychee studied the map in her hands, her tone grave. Drillhead's hideout was marked on it. Dante, still holding his improvised net, collected more fog-soaked moisture. Blue droplets rolled off and splashed onto the cone-headed inmate's face. The cone-headed man shrieked, demanding to know what the glowing liquid was. Dante explained calmly that it was water distilled from the pure fog of Fogland. The cone-headed inmate dipped a finger into the luminous puddle, tasting it cautiously. His eyes flew open in shock. He bellowed that the flavor was unmistakable. This was fog. Genuine fog. The cone-headed followers stared in wordless awe. Their leader leapt into the air with an odd ritualistic grace, shouting that they had secured infinite fog. The followers swarmed Dante, hoisting him up and chanting his new title with wild excitement. "Teacher, teacher." Later, Dante adjusted a newly tailored prison uniform, complete with a crisp tie. The cone-headed inmate approached him proudly, saying that Teacher looked like he had been born to wear a suit. He asked whether Teacher liked the new outfit. He declared that from this day forward, no one would dare touch Teacher. Teacher was now a member of Drillhead's group, deserving of their highest respect. Dante remembered the brutal logic of the prison. The only way out was to become the supreme leader. He repeated the phrase to himself with a forced smile. Drillhead made a grand proclamation. He announced that a massive fog festival would be held in their honor. Thanks to Teacher's discovery, fog no longer needed to be rationed. His eyes burned with ambition as he said that all the fog they had collected would be used for his ascension. Dante watched in shock as an enormous stockpile of glowing blue fog orbs was revealed, a mountain of the crystalline spheres glimmering in the torchlight. The bizarre ceremony began. Some followers blew into long pipes like ceremonial horns, while others beat crude drums made from scrap metal. The thunder of sound echoed through the underground chamber as Drillhead stood before his amassed fog. Dante, now adorned with a strange flower crown, stared in disbelief. Was all of this truly fog? Were they preparing for a mass hallucination ritual? Drillhead spread his arms wide and addressed his followers. He proclaimed himself the ruler of the underground and named them his drill soldiers. He declared that their efforts had finally paid off. His voice rose with fierce conviction as he shouted that with the fog they had hoarded, he would attempt ascension that very day. He asked if they believed in his ascension. The drill soldiers roared in agreement at once, their zeal shaking the chamber. Drillhead then scooped up a handful of fog orbs, a sinister smile stretching across his face. He leaned toward Dante and whispered that the teacher should pay close attention because the true birth of a king was about to begin. His cone-headed followers erupted in wild anticipation. Dante stared in dawning horror as he realized the leader's intention. Drillhead planned to consume all the fog alone. With the followers chanting for ascension, Drillhead began forcing fistfuls of the glowing orbs into his mouth. One anxious follower asked the others whether any changes had begun yet. Moments later, a sickening gurgle escaped Drillhead's throat. He collapsed backward as his stomach ballooned into an enormous glowing sphere of blue energy. His followers rushed toward him, asking if their leader was all right as electricity crackled around his swollen body. Drillhead groaned that the attempt had failed again, mentioning that even after consuming vast amounts of fog in the past, nothing extraordinary ever happened. One follower encouraged him to attempt ascension again another day, but another suddenly pointed out in shock that Drillhead's head appeared longer than before. Several agreed that the elongation was unmistakable. Drillhead's cranium stretched upward into an unnerving tower of bone. His followers shouted that ascension had begun and asked whether their leader felt a new talent awakening. Drillhead replied in a distant, transcendent tone that the universe could be felt expanding through him. In his mind, he drifted through a cosmic void, sensing the origin of fog itself. He proclaimed that all truths of existence were suddenly visible, and that everyone lived trapped upon a pale blue hell. The revelation tore his sanity apart. His body detonated in a burst of blinding blue light, scattering fog throughout the chamber. It was not ascension, it was destruction. The explosion hurled his followers across the hall. Fog rained down like a luminous storm. Dante, drenched in shimmering residue, stared in astonishment. The inmates screamed in delight that their leader had fallen. They shouted that an enormous amount of fog had been released and that it was wonderful. As pure fog poured down like rain, the followers rushed toward Drillhead's glowing remains, scrambling over one another to devour the raw energy. The true Grand Fog Festival erupted. Dante watched the chaos unfold, a manic smile creeping across his face as inmates tore apart their fallen leader in a frenzy. The chamber echoed with cries celebrating the festival as fog continued to pour down. Yet one inmate, pale with terror, broke through the madness and screamed over the noise that everyone needed to stop. He warned that consuming this much fog at once would kill them all. He seized Dante's shoulders and begged him to intervene, insisting that teacher must become the next leader. Dante recoiled in shock at the suggestion. He found the idea of becoming leader horrifying, but the crowd around him began chanting for a new Drillhead. Panicking, Dante turned and fled. The mob surged after him, shouting that the teacher must be captured. As Dante ran, the world distorted around him. He convinced himself that everything must be a dream. Then a familiar voice echoed in his mind, his elder brother's. The voice taunted that Dante had been warned. In the next instant, Dante found himself no longer in the prison, but in a dim blue corridor. A figure with a pitch-black orb for a head advanced toward him. Dante dropped to his knees, pleading for his brother to save him. But the disembodied voice replied coldly that Dante still failed to understand, that his fear was nothing more than a pathetic mask. Dante broke down, crying and screaming until the nightmare shattered. In its place came a memory, his childhood, when he could never remember his brother's face clearly. He recalled drawing a family picture and filling his brother's head with an empty circle. He remembered his brother asking why he was drawn like that, before dismissing Dante's attempt by saying that Dante would never become an artist. As a child, Dante could only see that face as a storm of shifting emotions. An angry beast one moment, a weeping woman the next, a clown, a demon. It was easier to imagine him with a blank, darkened circle for a face. With a strangled gasp, Dante jolted awake. His body shot upright, drenched in cold sweat, and he found himself inside a dim, makeshift tent. A voice addressed him, calling out to Master Dante, and Lychee and Rambutan appeared at the entrance, their expressions filled with worry as they informed him that he had finally regained consciousness. Still disoriented, Dante stared at them with fogged eyes. He lowered his gaze toward his trembling hands, feeling remnants of the nightmare clinging to his skin like static. He wondered aloud whether the horrors he had witnessed had merely been a dream. Rambutan calmly explained that they had carried him there after locating Drillhead's hideout on the map, and that they had eventually found him lying unconscious in the sewers. Dante was stunned that the two had gone through such trouble to rescue him. Lychee reassured him with a gentle smile, reminding him that the three of them had agreed to escape together. Dante immediately apologized for holding them back and urged that they continue moving, but Rambutan placed a steady hand on his shoulder and insisted they rest, explaining that they had already traveled a significant distance. Lychee lifted the tent flap, revealing a barren wasteland beneath a starless sky, and told him that they had discovered an area that was free of guard towers. Gathered around a small fire, Dante struggled to make sense of the madness he had witnessed earlier. He muttered that everyone had gone insane, and that the entire scene had devolved into pure chaos. He asked what was happening in that prison. Rambutan answered somberly that the phenomenon was known as falling, death caused by consuming excessive fog. He added that he had once overeaten fog himself. Lychee brushed off the confession as a poor attempt at humor, though Rambutan continued explaining that the more fog a person consumed, the more their potential increased. However, every individual had a personal threshold, and once that limit was reached, all accumulated fog would erupt violently from their body. He stared into the flames as he stated that everyone simply waited for someone else to reach their breaking point. Dante then asked what ascension truly meant. Rambutan responded, that ascension did not require surpassing a limit. Instead, he described rare cases where an individual reached their full potential and then unexpectedly developed a second talent. He explained that if such a talent appeared, every inmate would immediately devote themselves to that person, worshipping them as the supreme leader. With a weary sigh, Rambutan added that ascension was extraordinarily rare, and that most people simply fell. Dante stared into the fire, processing the grim truth. He stated that people were willing to sacrifice their lives for even the faintest chance at a second talent. Rambutan said that legend foretold someone with limitless talents who would one day emerge, someone capable of transcending the world's constraints and liberating everyone. He explained that this mythical figure would become their god, the ultimate supreme leader. Silence settled heavily over the camp as Rambutan's words lingered in the air. Dante adjusted his glasses, his expression sharpening with cold calculation as the information clicked into place. Elsewhere, atop a long water tank overlooking the ruined city, the one-armed prisoner muttered that he had finally located him. In another part of the complex, the same chamber where Drillhead had once attempted ascension, a cleanup crew dressed in white hazmat suits and gas masks methodically scrubbed away the glowing blue residue. They scraped the floors clean and packed the liquefied remains of fallen inmates into sealed containers. From a distance, the bag-headed scavenger observed them, quietly remarking that it was obvious someone fell every single day. He crouched low, carefully collecting his own small stash of fog residue, asking the others whether the scavenger was attempting ascension as well, calling the idea pathetic. A red-haired man approached the scavenger with an air of superiority. He told the scavenger, whom he addressed as a tourist, not to waste time gathering scraps, and instead held out a large plastic bag brimming with high-quality fog orbs. The scavenger accepted the payment, commenting on the excellent quality of the fog. The red-haired man asked whether the one-armed prisoner had already been found. The bag-headed scavenger replied indifferently that no one truly knew. Perhaps the prisoner had already been located, perhaps not. The red-haired man's tone turned icy as he complained that an entire year had passed, and that this was all the scavenger had managed to produce. The bag-headed man responded that the job hardly seemed profitable, pointing out that the assignment came from Fogland's Operations Bureau. He remarked that prices had risen significantly throughout the year and demanded higher compensation. A vicious grin twisted across the red-haired man's face, his eyes flaring with predatory intent. He said that if the scavenger delivered the one-armed prisoner, then he would be paid as much as he desired. That night, after hours of restless turning, Dante found himself unable to sleep. The cold seeped into his bones, making his breath tremble in the frigid air. Across the small tent, Rambutan and Lychee had drifted off, unconsciously curling together beneath a shared blanket. Their closeness, the warmth between them, made Dante acutely aware of the loneliness pressing against his chest. He let out a faint cough, just loud enough to signal that he was awake. Rambutan stirred and asked whether Dante felt cold and if he wanted to move closer to share their warmth. Dante quietly responded that he was fine, though he kept his distance out of courtesy and discomfort. Dawn broke with a pale, bleak light. The three of them stood before the enormous prison wall, preparing to climb it. But something was wrong. Fresh blood was splattered across the stones, far too early for a morning incident. Dante asked Rambutan if there was any way he could help. Rambutan handed him a small canvas bag, saying that Dante would understand its purpose soon enough. Before they began the ascent, Rambutan asked whether Dante practiced religion. He explained that he wanted to offer a prayer before making the jump. Lychee added that Dante's specific faith did not matter, only that he knew how to pray at all. Something was better than nothing. Dante admitted that the only prayer he remembered was the Our Father. Rambutan cut him off and said that would be enough. He extended his hand out solemnly, signaling for Dante to begin. Rambutan prepared himself to leap, his feet bracing against the stones. Lychee nodded toward Dante, urging him to start the prayer. Dante began reciting the verse in a low, trembling voice. Just as Rambutan bent his knees to jump, a blur tore through the air. The one-armed prisoner arrived with a single, devastating strike, stopping Rambutan mid-movement. Lychee rushed to Rambutan's side, asking with a frightened voice whether he was hurt. Dante looked up and froze. The one-armed prisoner stood directly in front of him, his presence heavy and furious. Dante had no idea how he had appeared so suddenly. The one-armed prisoner accused him of deception and claimed he had come to kill Dante for lying. Before any of them could react, his figure vanished from their sight, moving with impossible speed. Rambutan grabbed Dante's wrist and sprinted. Lychee followed, shouting questions. Why had the one-armed prisoner attacked them without warning? Even at full speed, Rambutan could barely gain distance. He muttered that the one-armed prisoner's talent must be extraordinary speed. He added that if Dante had not stopped earlier, his leg would have been shattered by that first blow. The one-armed prisoner reappeared instantly, blocking their path. He extended his leg, forcing Rambutan to skid to a halt. Now that Dante was within reach, the one-armed prisoner declared that he would end him, but then he paused, collecting himself. He demanded to know what Dante had supposedly lied about. Dante reminded him that he had explained how to grow the sweet potato. The one-armed prisoner shouted that he had already watered it and placed it in the sun, yet it still had not grown. Dante answered that it had only been one day. The one-armed prisoner claimed his time had been wasted, but Dante insisted otherwise. He explained that growth required patience, at least a week before noticeable changes appeared. The one-armed prisoner begrudgingly accepted this, but his frustration shifted into uncertainty. He asked where he was supposed to go now. Dante had told him earlier that he himself would be leaving this place. The one-armed prisoner questioned whether Dante intended for him to accompany them. Dante stepped back and told him not to interfere. He had already given the one-armed prisoner the knowledge he needed. The one-armed prisoner explained that he was risking his life for Dante and wanted to know whether Dante, by crossing the wall, expected him to die anyway. Before the argument could continue, Rambutan snapped and demanded that the one-armed prisoner stop bothering them. Dante noticed Rambutan's sudden anxiety and asked what was wrong, but Rambutan replied that there was no time to explain. He grabbed Dante's arm and asked whether Dante wanted to escape. Dante admitted that he did, though something in his gut churned uneasily. They climbed higher, closer to the top. Dante began to trust the two beside him, trusting in their shared struggle. But just before they all crossed over, Rambutan looked back, his expression filled with guilt. He offered Dante a quiet apology and shoved him. The push launched Rambutan and Lychee forward, giving them momentum to clear the wall. But that wasn't the only purpose. The bag Dante carried, the one Rambutan had given him earlier, was filled with fog. Dante had been used. They had only needed Dante as bait so they could escape the creature that hunted them. On another side of the wall, two prisoners noticed the fresh scorch marks spread across the stone. Judging by the damage, someone had attempted to escape, and the blast radius looked to be nearly 30 meters. And judging by the monster's unseen presence, they murmured to each other that another poor soul is going to die. Far below the wall's shadow, a monstrous creature, twisted, towering, and hungry, lifted its head from the darkness. Its body coiled like a predator preparing to strike, ready to devour falling Dante. The scene shifted to the past, where Rambutan and Lychee were gathering information about the monsters long before they ever met Dante. Rambutan stood in front of the massive monster statue, glaring at it. Lychee warned him not to touch it, but Rambutan ignored her and asked whether she thought the monster was actually alive. Before she could answer, he kicked the statue angrily and declared that the creature only stayed frozen as long as no one crossed the walls of the prison. According to him, this monster was the only thing preventing them from escaping Fogland. Lychee calmly explained that this monster had appeared the same day the fog arrived. Some believe the government created it as a tool to contain the fog leakage, the fog humans inhaled and carried within their bodies. She said the authorities didn't want the fog disappearing, so they made sure something was blocking the escape routes. She then asked Rambutan if he didn't think the monster could sense the fog. It always knew who was planning to escape, as long as it remained there. No one could leave. Her voice trembled as she confessed that she didn't want to stay trapped here forever, without freedom, without sunlight, and she broke into tears. Rambutan gently took her hand. He told her nothing like that would happen. There was a way out. He reminded her that he had already promised to take her outside one day. Looking into her eyes, he said she needed to trust him. He would do anything for her. The scene snapped back to the present. Dante fell straight into the monster's gaping mouth. Meanwhile, Rambutan was thinking fast. His plan had worked. He had secretly placed fog inside Dante's bag, tricking the monster into believing Dante was the one trying to escape. Rambutan insulted Dante in his mind, calling him a stupid prayer boy. He believed this was the moment he had been waiting for a chance to break free. He immediately jumped over the prison wall. For the first time, sunlight poured down on his face. He stared at the bright sky in disbelief, whispering with joy that they had finally escaped, they were finally free. He turned to tell Lychee the good news, but something felt horribly wrong. Lychee was standing behind him, but her head was missing. Rambutan froze in shock, unable to understand what he was seeing. Then, in his horror, he realized another monster stood nearby. This one with only one leg, and Lychee's severed head hanging from its mouth. The monster devoured Lychee's head in one bite. Rambutan's mind went blank. Rage exploded through him, and he launched himself forward at full speed, leg drawn back for a killing strike. At the same moment, the one-legged monster gathered fog in its mouth, preparing its own attack. Just before Rambutan's kick could land, the creature released the fog blast. Rambutan's leg began to melt midair, the corrosive fog eating through his flesh as it slammed him backward into the wall. Nearby, the first monster silently watched everything unfold, unmoving, observing. The scene shifted back to one-armed man, who was standing before the first monster. He stared at the creature while thinking about Dante. He muttered that he had already warned Dante there was no way to escape Fogland. With a cold expression, he tightened his fist. His terrifying eyes locked on the monster. Then he leapt forward and slammed a crushing punch directly into the monster's teeth, shattering them instantly. The monster responded by releasing fog from its eyes and launching an attack. but the one-armed man dodged with ease. He told the creature that it was pointless, the monster was already broken. He peered into its shattered mouth and saw Dante sitting between the broken teeth, trembling and crying. Dante looked at him helplessly and begged, calling him 182, pleading to be saved. Admitting he had been wrong, the one-armed man reached out his hand. Dante grabbed it desperately, and the man pulled him out of the monster's mouth. Dante clung to him, crying that he thought he was going to die. He admitted he feared the one-armed man had come to kill him because his presence was so terrifying. The one-armed man told Dante to open his eyes. Dante didn't understand what he meant, but the man repeated the instruction firmly. He told Dante to say the words, "I won't try to leave this place anymore." But the moment Dante looked at the monster again, he started screaming in terror, asking what kind of creature it was and begging the one-armed man to take him away. The one-armed man refused to listen. He repeated again and again that Dante needed to say he would never try to escape. He reminded him he had warned him countless times there was no exit from this place. He insisted he had never lied about that fact. Finally, with his head pressed against the ground, Dante surrendered and said he would not go anywhere anymore. The one-armed man turned toward the monster. The creature stared back at him for a moment, then vanished completely. Dante asked if the monster had really left, what kind of being it was, and whether it was an illusion. He also asked about Rambutan and Lychee, whether they had escaped successfully. The one-armed man answered quietly. Rambutan and Lychee were dead. When Dante asked how, the man explained that the monster wasn't an illusion. Anyone who tried to escape would be killed. It didn't matter how strong they were, no one could defeat the Hollow One. The scene then revealed the lifeless bodies of Lychee and Rambutan, confirming the truth of his words. After that, the scene shifted to another prisoner, a notorious cannibal known throughout Fogland as Bone Eater. His reputation alone was enough to terrify most inmates. Standing in front of him was Baghead, the prisoner with a sack covering his face. Baghead commented that Bone Eater was an extremely frightening name, and then asked whether he truly ate people, or if the name was just meant to scare others. Bone Eater replied that if Baghead doubted him, he was welcome to try finding out. He said he was also curious about how Baghead might taste, and he extended his long tongue toward him, touching him with disturbing intent. Baghead immediately warned him to stay away. Bone Eater chuckled and said the boy felt rather soft. He claimed he was only tasting him with his tongue to judge the flavor. Baghead yelled at him to stop. Then Bone Eater shifted his gaze and asked why a child like Baghead had come here. What business did he have with a monster like him? Baghead replied that he needed Bone Eater's help to locate someone. He held up a photograph and explained that he was searching for prisoner number 182, a tall man, height 182 centimeters, with 2 moles on the right side of his face and 1 missing arm. Bone Eater took the photograph from his hand and murmured that the man looked delicious. He asked if he was allowed to eat him. Baghead, forcing himself to stay calm despite his fear, said that if Bone Eater really wished to, then perhaps he could. Bone Eater smirked and said Baghead clearly understood him well, then demanded to know who Baghead truly was. Baghead answered that he was someone just like Bone Eater. Bone Eater remarked that Baghead spoke unusually well, unlike anyone he had ever met down here. Baghead told him that wasn't surprising. After all, Bone Eater was merely a village inmate from this place, whereas Baghead came from a region where only the strong survived. He added that he wasn't just any prisoner, he was a senior of District A.